During the period when the Dodonans were the supreme rulers of Ireland, another race of people who had settled in Spain set out to conquer Ireland. These people were called the Milesians, and they were ruled by their king Miled. One cold, clear night, grandfather of King Miled, climbed up onto the battlements and saw an island far off in the distance. Rushed down into the banquet hall to tell the other Milesians what he had just seen. There was much discussion, and all of the Milesians agreed it must be the land that their druid Amergin had prophesied. The next day, and the 8 sons of King Miled set off in search of this island. Some days later, the Milesians found the island. On landing, found out that the Dodonan king Ethna had been killed by the Formorians. King Ethna's 3 sons, Mocuil, Mocecht, and Mocrena, were busy dividing up their inheritance at the Dún of Aileach in County Donegal when they heard that and the other Milesians were outside their Dún. King Ethna's 3 sons sent word for them to enter and went down to greet them. "Welcome, noble to the shores of Ireland. You are a wise and learned man, so I would like to ask your advice." "What is it you would like to ask?" said "My brothers and I would like you to advise us on how we should divide up our inheritance amongst us." The noble gave his decision, but made the mistake of mentioning his desire to rule Ireland himself. Mocuil and his brothers immediately killed as they were aware of his intentions. A fierce battle arose between the Milesians and the Dodonans. But the Milesians were no match for the strong Dodonans, and had to retreat and return to Spain, bringing their beloved leader Ith's body. However, the Milesians were determined to avenge their leader's death, and set out for Ireland once again. They went in 36 boats, each with its own leader and followers, and set course for Ireland. During the voyage, 2 of the Milesian ships sank, drowning one of Miled's sons, who had climbed up onto the mast of the ship. Eventually the Milesians arrived, landed and marched towards Tara in County Meath. Mocuil and his 2 brothers were told to give up their rule of Ireland or be killed. The Dodonans asked for 3 days to consider the Milesians' offer. Their idea was to outwit the Milesians through their powerful magic. There was much discussion amongst the Milesians, who decided to leave the decision up to their own druid Amergin, who said, "It's not fair that you take the Dodonans by surprise, so let's do as they ask and set sail out to the 9th wave and then return and defeat these Dodonans." They all agreed with Amergin's judgment. When the Milesians reached the 9th wave and were about to set sail for Ireland once again, a thick mist descended upon them, completely obscuring their view of Ireland. The Milesians consulted Amergin, who immediately recognized that the mist was the work of the Dodonans' druid's sorcery. Suddenly, a violent storm erupted, scattering and sinking many of the Milesian warships. To find out where they were, the Milesians sent a man to climb high up onto one of the ship's masts. But the poor man fell off the mast, and before he fell into the sea, he cried out, "There is no storm beyond! It is only the witchcraft of the Dodonans!" Immediately, Amergin uttered his magic spells, and the storm disappeared. One of the Milesian lords, who was angry at the loss of his men, cried out, "A curse upon the Dodonans! We will destroy each man, woman, and child of the Dodonan race!" Suddenly, another storm arose, more powerful than the last one. Huge waves pounded against the Milesian warships. 5 sons of King Miled were drowned as their ships sank. The sea air was filled with screams of men, women, and children as they disappeared beneath the waves. The other 2 sons of Miled battled on, and after much effort they reached the shores of Ireland at the mouth of the River Boyne in County Louth. A bloody battle was fought between the Milesians and the Dodonans, and this time the Dodonans were defeated. The Milesians set about dividing up Ireland amongst themselves. The new Milesian life in Ireland was a simple one. The menfolk tilled the soil, sowed their seeds and tended their herds of cattle by the hillsides. In late summer, they harvested their crops and stored their food for the long winter months. The women remained at home, baking, sewing, weaving and educating their children to be learned and brave. Years went by, with each tribe growing bigger and more powerful. Each clan had their own king, and each member swore his allegiance and loyalty to their elected king. They gave their king cattle, land, and the power to rule them, and their willingness to follow him into battle. These Milesians, or Gaels, as they later came to be known, were pagans. They worshipped strange gods and goddesses, similar to those the Greeks and Romans worshipped, but with one difference. That is, that no god or goddess was more powerful than the other. Throughout Ireland, many of these Gaels worshipped the sun, the moon, the thunder, and the lightning. But more important than anything else, they worshipped the deep underground wells from where they drew their cold, clear water. For a long time, the Milesians or Gaels prospered in Ireland, but as each tribe or clan became bigger and more powerful, bitter jealousies arose. Each wanted to rule the other. Each wanted the other's land and cattle. To protect themselves from each other, they began to build strong fortresses. At the time of their defeat by the Milesians, the Dodonans retreated underground, where they built magnificent palaces. They delighted in spending all their time feasting and dancing. The Dodonans came to be known throughout Ireland as the Sidhe, or the fairy folk. By their expertise in witchcraft, the Dodonans could, if they wished, surface above the ground, protected by their power to make themselves invisible. No mortal could ever see or hear them, if they so desired. Very often, the Dodonans, or as they now came to be known throughout Ireland, the fairy folk, would surface above the ground in search of a newborn child. When they found a newborn child, they would exchange their own child for the mortal baby and disappear with it underground. In order to feed the mortal child, the fairy folk would often entice a cow up onto the grassy hill. Then they would milk it and bring the milk to feed the newborn child. No human could ever find the entrance to their underground palace, in spite of searching high and low. All there was to be found on top of these grassy hills were nettles and brambles. Unknown to the human, this was the entrance to the fairy folk's kingdom. Often, after a long search, the human would lie down in despair and fall asleep, only to awake to the lovely sound of music wafting its way up from beneath the ground. To this day, Tir na Nog, the land of youth, with its fairy folk, exists strongly in the imagination of the Irish, and many a story can be heard around a blazing turf fire about the fairy folk.
Long ago, when Conor was king of Usnach in Ulster, a baby girl was born to Phelim, the king's harper. The prophet Cathbad was summoned by the king and was asked to predict her future. The wise Cathbad studied the stars for a long time. And suddenly he cried out, "Misfortune will fall upon the men of Ireland. Even though Phelim's daughter Deirdre will be good and virtuous, as fair and as beautiful as the rising dawn, evil will fall on all of us because of her. She will marry a foreign king, and because of this, there will be much bloodshed, slaughter, murder, and treachery. Men will go into exile. Brother will fight brother. She will bring much sorrow to the people of Ireland." When King Conor listened to Cathbad's prophecy, he said firmly, "I will prevent this from coming true. The only person she will marry will be me when she's of age." Immediately, he ordered that a castle be built for her far away from all his people, in the middle of a lush green valley high up in the mountains where no man could find her. He covered the roof of her mountain castle with sods of grass, so that it looked like a field from afar. He summoned a trusted maiden named Laocham, to watch over and educate the girl. King Conor believed that if he did this, the prophecy of Cathbad would not be fulfilled. Many years later, Deirdre grew up to become as beautiful as the dawn of day. Her figure was as slim as a blade of grass. She moved as nimbly as a deer in the forest. Her eyes were as clear and deep as the highest mountain lake, and blue as the sky above it. Her skin was white as milk, and as sweet as a flower petal at sunrise. Laocham, Deirdre's guardian, taught her everything about the different species of birds and animals that roamed in the forest, the flowers that grew in the valleys. When Deirdre reached the age of 14, Laocham told her that she was to marry the aging King Conor. "Never shall I marry him, for not only is he too old, but he's ugly as well." One morning, Deirdre was gazing out of a bedroom window at a blanket of white snow that had fallen during the night. In the still frosty air, the trees were standing tall and looked as if they were made of silver. Deirdre marveled at the sight below her. A black raven flew excitedly from branch to branch, as if he wanted to tell Deirdre something. Suddenly, she realized what the bird was trying to tell her. Deirdre ran downstairs and cried out to Laocham, "I will marry a man with hair as black as a raven's feathers and skin as white as snow." "You have described Naoise, son of Usnach, who lives at King Conor's palace. I would like nothing better than to meet this man and marry him." "No, my child, you are destined to marry the king." Deirdre sighed and returned to her weaving. One night, not long after she had seen the black raven, Deirdre awoke to a deafening cry. Laocham heard it too and became alarmed. "What was that?" "'Twas nothing but the cry of a night bird." But again the cry echoed through the night. Deirdre listened breathlessly, saying to herself, "'Tis the cry of neither bird nor beast. 'Tis a human cry." She quickly donned her clothes and slipped out of her room. She made her way downstairs, out onto the courtyard, and opened the castle gate, whispering, "Who's there?" Out of the darkness came a dark stranger. He looked lost and hungry. Presently he spoke. "I have wandered far and become lost. I lay down to sleep. You must have cried out in your dreams." Deirdre brought him in, and in the light of the castle corridor she noticed that he had black hair, just like a raven. His skin was as white as milk. "'Tis you, Naoise! 'Tis you!" Naoise was startled at her voice and at what she had just said. She was the most beautiful girl upon whom his eyes had ever fallen. He answered her softly, "I have searched for you far and wide. I love you and wish to have you as my wife." "I love you too, for I have dreamed you would find me one day. Take me with you, for if you do not, the old King Conor will make me his wife." "It shall be so. Tonight I must leave you, but I will return tomorrow with my 2 brothers. We will leave this land, and King Conor will not have you for his wife." With these words, he took his leave from her. Deirdre hastily returned to her room. The next night, as Naoise had promised, he appeared with his 2 brothers. Together with Laocham, they all made their way northwestwards. It was not long until King Conor heard of Deirdre's escape, and he was furious. He sent his best men to bring her back. Unknown to anyone, Deirdre, Laocham, and the sons of Usnach slipped on board a boat to Scotland. There on the shoreline, Deirdre and Naoise built a magnificent castle and settled down to live in peace. Never had a girl such love and affection from her husband and his brothers. She kept the castle spotlessly clean, baked the most delicious bread, wove the finest cloth, while Naoise and his brothers hunted and fished. For a long time, they were all extremely happy, and little did they know that King Conor was searching high and low for them. In the story, The Return of the Sons of Usnach, we shall hear how he found them.
When Brez and his mother arrived at the Formorian stronghold, which was Tory Island off the north coast of Ireland, word soon reached Elotha, who was now a king, that his wife and son had arrived. King Elotha rushed to meet his wife. His eyes fell upon Brez, and King Elotha instantly recognized the ring on his finger. He embraced his son, whom he had not seen since he had left his weeping wife to return to his own land. Over a large banquet that night, Brez told his father, the king, how the Dodonans had stripped him of his kingship. King Elotha shouted out angrily, "The Dodonans have gone too far. We must send word to Balor of the Evil Eye to set sail for Ireland to defeat those Dodonans once and for all." Balor of the Evil Eye was growing old and feeble. Balor had only one eye in the middle of his forehead. This evil eye could turn a man into stone if he looked at it. Balor's enemies feared him greatly. But as Balor was becoming older, his eyelid had begun to droop over his powerful eye. Many of his men had to use a pulley, whereby when they pulled the ropes, his eyelid would open up. Now King Elotha's messenger was dispatched to Balor, asking him for his help. Immediately, Balor ordered his 7 battalions to prepare to sail for Ireland to defeat the Dodonans. Meanwhile, in Ireland, Luga, who had been looking out over the battlements towards the sea, saw in the distance the approaching Formorians. He ran to tell King Nuadat, "My lord, the time has come for me to repay you for all your kindness. Let's set out and defeat the Formorians. Fear not for me, for I am armed with the magical treasures of my foster father, MacLear the sea god. He bestowed 3 magical gifts upon me, a magnificent golden horse named Enbar, who can carry me across land or sea. He is so swift that the fastest arrow cannot overtake him. The second treasure is the boat of Manon, which can read a man's thoughts and will sail anywhere. The third treasure is the Fraggarach, which means the answerer. The Fraggarach will cut through any metal. Finally, I have a breastplate which neither sword nor spear can penetrate." Shortly afterwards, Luga and King Nuadat set off to fight the invading Formorians. When Luga and the king arrived at the plain of the assembly, where Balor and Brez had camped, Luga approached from the west, with the morning sun reflecting off his armour. On his head, Luga wore a helmet studded with precious jewels. As Luga approached, the Formorian sentries were dazzled by his armour and his helmet in the distance. They ran back to tell Balor. Both Balor and Brez were mystified and summoned their wise druid to see if he understood the meaning of this light. As soon as the druid arrived, Brez asked him, "This light disturbs me greatly. Why does the light around Luga dazzle me so much? Maybe the Dodonans with their powerful magic have made the sun rise in the east." "You fool, it's not the sun, but only the helmet of the Dodonan leader, Luga." A short time later, Luga rode up to within a few feet of Brez, as Brez shouted, "Why do you come alone? Don't you see that we have 7 battalions against you?" "We are from the same family," said Luga, and continued, "I will give you the opportunity to return to your own land. Before you leave, you must return the cattle you stole from us." Brez simply laughed and said, "We will fight and defeat all of you. We are not frightened by your idle threats. Not 1 cow will I return to you. Neither will we take 1 foot back until you are all dead." "We shall see," said Luga, as he returned to the rest of the Dodonans. For 3 days, the Dodonans and the Formorians fought. Arrows and javelins whizzed through the air. Men shouted in triumph as they saw their enemies fall to the ground. Closer and closer they fought with their swords. The battlefield was filled with the sound of shouting, screaming, and swords crashing down upon metal shields. Finally, King Nuadat was struck, fell off his horse, and died. Balor's evil eye had killed him with a mere glance. Luga, high up on his enchanted horse Enbar, and still wearing his magic breastplate and waving his magic sword, was invincible. By this stage, Balor was beginning to feel tired, and his eyelid began drooping over his evil eye. His men immediately began to pull on a series of ropes, lifting up his eyelid. However, Luga seized his chance while the eyelid was drooped over Balor's eye. Placing a stone in his sling, Luga waited until Balor's eye was just visible and shot the stone straight into the evil eye, killing Balor before he could blink. So it was that Luga had indeed killed his own grandfather, just as the druid had prophesied. The Formorians, on seeing their leader dead, retreated with Brez in the direction of the north, never to set foot in Ireland again. King Conor ordered his men to keep searching the length and breadth of Ireland for Deirdre. Word finally reached him that Deirdre had fled to Scotland and was living with the sons of Usnach. He was furious and disappeared to his chambers to devise a devious and wicked plan to recapture them. He called together his men and asked, "Is there anything that you want?" To which the men replied, "Nothing." "Well, if you do not want anything, then there is something that I want. It saddens me that Ulster has lost the 3 valiant sons of Usnach. They are in exile in Scotland. I bear them no grudge. Let us send a messenger to ask them to return." All the nobles applauded at King Conor's suggestion. Conor summoned a man named Fergus, who the sons of Usnach trusted more than anyone else. The king instructed Fergus to travel to Scotland with messages of love and friendship, and a promise that if Deirdre and the sons of Usnach returned, he would pardon them all. He also told Fergus that on his journey back from Scotland, he must stop at the fort of Burgh. Unknown to Fergus, King Conor was plotting a treacherous plan. He ordered Fergus that under no circumstances were Deirdre or the sons of Usnach to break their journey. Fergus was assured by King Conor that nothing would happen to them. With this pledge, Fergus departed for Scotland, bearing the king's good news. He took with him his 2 sons, Ilan and Buino. When Fergus reached the castle where Deirdre and the sons of Usnach lived, they greeted Fergus joyfully. Fergus told them of King Conor's message. Naoise and his 2 brothers were overjoyed, as they were homesick, but Deirdre foresaw evil and warned them not to return. Naoise told her that she was too suspicious and that she need not worry, as they were under the protection of Fergus. On landing in Ireland, they were met by Burgh, a lord in the Red Branch, who had his fort, or Dún, close by. Burgh invited Fergus to stay the night in the fort, but Fergus replied, "I cannot stay, for I must travel with Deirdre and the sons of Usnach to King Conor's palace." "Nevertheless, you must stay," replied Burgh, "for King Conor has sent word that you mustn't refuse a night's lodging." Hearing this, Fergus realised that he had to stay, and so he ordered his 2 sons, Ilan and Buino, to accompany Deirdre and the sons of Usnach to King Conor's palace. Deirdre begged Fergus not to leave them, but to no avail. Leaving Fergus behind, Deirdre felt very sad, and before Burgh's fort was out of sight, she once again pleaded with Naoise to return to Fergus. But Naoise and his brother simply laughed at her, and Naoise said, "Would Fergus have stayed behind if he had thought that we were in any danger whatsoever? Every night on their journey, Deirdre's dreams were full of evil omens. Again and again she begged them to return, but again they told her that she was simply imagining things. So they continued, and soon they reached the gates of King Connor's palace. For the last time, Deirdre pleaded with them, but to no avail. Finally, she said, "Then I will give you a sign, by which you will know that what I say is indeed true. King Connor is planning to kill you. If he invites us into his palace, all is well. But if he sends us to the house of the Red Branch, then you will know that what I say is indeed true." King Connor, meanwhile, was feasting and drinking when a messenger told him that Deirdre and the sons of Usnach were at the palace gate. He ordered that they be taken to the house of the Red Branch. He continued to feast, but his mind wandered to Deirdre. He was curious to find out if she was still as beautiful as before. He sent for Laocham, Deirdre's servant, and asked her, "How is Deirdre? Is she as beautiful as before?" Now Laocham's loyalty lay with Deirdre and the sons of Usnach, as she loved them dearly. She had seen how much Deirdre loved Naoise, and as she lived amongst them in Scotland, had grown to love them all. Laocham had begun to realise that Deirdre's warnings were true, so she replied to King Connor, "My lord, Deirdre is well, but her beauty and youth have vanished." With that, King Connor dismissed her. He began to drink heavily, and very soon his thoughts returned once again to Deirdre. He summoned his servant Trendorn, and ordered him to go and see if Deirdre's beauty had indeed faded. However, when Trendorn arrived at the house of the Red Branch, he found the doors bolted. Looking around, he found a ladder and climbed up and peered in through one of the windows. Inside, he saw the sons of Usnach, two of whom were cleaning their weapons. Across from them, his eyes fell upon the most beautiful maiden he had ever seen. He guessed that this was Deirdre. There she sat, beside another young man, playing chess. As he looked in, one of the brothers saw him and let out a shout. Immediately, Naoise, who was playing chess with Deirdre, looked up and threw a chess piece at Trendorn. The chess piece found its mark on Trendorn's left eye. He let out a scream and disappeared back to report to Connor. Connor was furious, and immediately he set out with his men to attack the sons of Usnach. Buino, son of Fergus, killed many of King Connor's men in the ensuing battle. Meanwhile, Deirdre and Naoise continued to play their game of chess. Naoise believed, as they were under Fergus's son's protection, it was not necessary for the sons of Usnach to fight. King Connor sent word to Buino that if Buino joined him in his fight against the sons of Usnach, he would be given much land and cattle. Buino accepted King Connor's bribe to join him. Ilan immediately took up the fight against King Connor. A fierce fight followed, with Ilan being defeated by King Connor's son Fiachra. Naoise and his brothers sprang up with Deirdre shielded amongst them. They killed 300 men and made their escape. King Connor summoned his druid Cuthbert and told him, "Go, Cuthbert, and cast a spell over them. I promise you I will not harm them." Cuthbert believed the king, and with his powerful magic spell, he threw an enchantment over them, which made Deirdre and the sons of Usnach believe that they were in the middle of a dark ocean. Taking Deirdre on their shoulders, for fear that she may be lashed against the rocks, they vainly tried to swim ashore. They were soon captured by the king's men. King Connor ordered his men to kill the sons of Usnach, but such was the love and respect that the men of Ulster had for them that none would kill them. At last, Owen, son of Deirdre, drew his sword and cut off the heads of the 3 sons of Usnach. Then King Connor took Deirdre. For a year they lived together. Not one smile did the poor girl give him. Finally, the king asked her, "What is wrong with you, my dear?" "I loathe you, and Owen, son of Deirdre, for what you did to the sons of Usnach." To this, the king told Deirdre that she was to go to Owen for a year. But when Deirdre mounted Owen's horse, she kept her eyes to the ground. As soon as the horse had gained a fast pace, Deirdre flung herself down under the hooves of the horse, killing herself. When they buried her beside Misha and his brothers, it is said that 2 yew trees sprang up, and that their tops met each other over the church of Armagh. When Fergus returned and found out what the king had done, he was enraged and shouted to the king, "You have done a wicked and treacherous deed. Not alone have you betrayed me, but you have killed the finest men that Ulster has ever reared." When the other Ulster chiefs heard what had happened, they joined Fergus and attacked King Conor, burning his palace to the ground. Soon after, Fergus went to Connacht to join Queen Maeve to fight against Conor.
Many years ago, by the banks of the River Boyne in County Louth, there stood a glittering palace named Angus, which belonged to Prince Angus. Today, this site is known as New Grange and is famous throughout the world. It was around this time that the Milesian race invaded Ireland. As you may remember from the story of the coming of the Milesians, they were a race of people that originally came from the south of Spain. When the Milesians invaded Ireland, the Danann folk retreated underground to their magnificent palaces to feast and dance. Above the ground, all the humans were able to see were green hills or mounds surrounded by nettles and brambles. Now, after Prince Angus and the Dannans had retreated underground and taken on the veil of invisibility, it happened that a servant of the palace gave birth to a baby girl. She was named Ethna and was to be reared by Angus in the palace. In the palace there were 2 sacred treasures, an ale vat, that is, a casket which could never be emptied, and 2 pigs. One pig was a magic pig, which could be roasted on the spit forever, thereby ensuring a plentiful supply of food for all at the palace. There was never any shortage of food and drink, thanks to the magic spells that Angus performed. No one grew old or sick in the palace. In time, Ethna blossomed into a fair and beautiful girl. One day it came to the attention of Angus that Ethna neither drank nor ate. Still, she remained strong and healthy. Angus got very worried and consulted Manon, who by his wisdom discovered Ethna's secret. Apparently, one of the lords of the Dannans was visiting Angus, and he caught sight of the beautiful Ethna, and he simply carried her off to his palace. However, Ethna succeeded in escaping from him. This experience awoke in Ethna the moral spirit of man, which the Dannans did not possess. In other words, the guardian demon left her, and the angel of the true God took its place. After this event, Ethna never again ate the food or drink of the Dannans. She was miraculously nourished by the will of God. Some time later, Angus and Manon returned from a voyage to the east, bringing with them 2 cows, whose milk never ran out. As these cows were supposed to be holy, Ethna lived off their milk. All this is supposed to have occurred under the King Erman, the first Milesian king of Ireland. One hot summer's day, Ethna, together with the other young maidens, went down to the river bank to bathe. After they all had refreshed themselves in the cool, clear, amber-coloured water of the River Boyne, they began to dress themselves in their beautiful silken garments. The maidens then returned to the palace. On entering, they looked around and discovered that Ethna was missing. "Where is she?" one of the maidens cried out. "Let's return to the river bank and look for her." They all returned and looked everywhere. Some of them searched along the river bank, while others searched behind the great oak trees. But they were unable to find her, and returned to Angus and Manon in great distress. What had happened was this. In taking off her garments, Ethna had lost her fairy charm, thereby making her a mortal. She was no longer able to see or call out to her friends. Her surroundings were all of a sudden completely unfamiliar to her. The fairy path that had led her to the river bank was overgrown with brambles, and the palace of Angus was but a wooded hill. Poor Ethna became very, very frightened and fled into the forest. She searched everywhere for the familiar places that she had known in her fairy life, but these were now hidden behind the veil of invisibility. At length, she came to a high wall with a wrought iron gate. Peering through, Ethna saw a beautiful garden with sweet-scenting herbs and flowers, surrounding a steep-roofed stone building. In the garden, she saw a strange man dressed in a long brown robe, which was tied around his waist by a cord. The strange man looked up, smiled, and beckoned her to come in. When she had told her story to the kind man, he explained that he was a Christian monk, spreading the word of St. Patrick. The stone building was a church. He instructed Ethna in the Christian faith and baptized her. Sometime afterwards, Ethna was deep in prayer in the church when she heard a rushing sound in the air. She listened intently and heard cries and lamentations in the distance. Her own name sounded in the rushing wind. Again and again she heard the voices call her name. She sprung up, calling in return, "I'm Ethna. I hear you." But she could see nothing. She realized that it was her own fairy folk looking for her. At last, the wind and the voices faded in the distance. Around her came the sound of the water gently flowing by and the humming of the garden bees. Then, all of a sudden, Ethna fainted. The monks found her later and brought her to her room. She recovered her senses eventually. From that day onwards, she was forever ill. She had been struck by a mortal sickness from which she never recovered. A few days later, she died with her head resting upon the breast of St. Patrick, who administered the last rites. The little stone church was named after her, Kil Ethna, which in Irish means Church of Ethna.